We've heard from the White House, we've heard from the president saying that the Russians started this campaign in 2014, long before he announced he would run for president. The results of the election were not impacted, according to President Trump, and the campaign, he says, did nothing wrong. Give us the reaction from your end, especially since you had been holding hearings in the Intelligence Committee.
Well, first of all, I'd like to state pretty clearly that I don't think the president's tweets are any longer relevant as it relates to this ongoing investigation. They ceased to be relevant quite some time ago. Remember, this is the individual who has maintained all along that the entire allegation that the Russians interfered in our election was a hoax. What I really hope comes out of this broad, breathtakingly sweeping indictment of 13 individuals in unbelievable detail is that the members of the majority party on the Intelligence Committee and elsewhere will engage in some very serious soul-searching about how serious they're going to take this investigation going forward.
Congressman, this investigation aside, is there anything in your view that could be done to steal future U.S. elections or to protect them against interference? Absolutely, and we have precisely 260 days to get that done before the midterms, and we ought to yesterday. To begin with, a couple of weeks ago, the president refused to levy the sanctions that the Congress passed by a margin of 517 to 5 in the aggregate, as I recall. I think we have to send a message to the Russians that if they're going to do this, there's going to be a cost to be paid, a price to be paid, and thus far this administration has refused to levy any kind of accountability against the Russians for what is clearly, definitively now with this indictment, been established. And by the way, I hope everybody understands that this indictment document is freely available online at the Department of Justice. I invite and encourage your viewers to go read it for themselves. It reads like a novel.
Certainly, we've been seeing a lot of the excerpts being released on social media. And speaking of social media, what about accountability there, Congressman? Do you and your colleagues in Congress plan to, after hearing from executives from the likes of Facebook and Twitter and Google, do you plan to introduce any kind of legislation to regulate Russian interference or any foreign power interference via their platforms?
So I think our response is going to have to be clear and multidimensional, and I think working with and holding our social media platform companies accountable is a component of it, but so is helping state and local election officials make sure that their IT infrastructure is fully protected against Russian interference, and so too is the Russian accountability measure to make sure that they do pay a price. There are a lot of things we can, should, and must do, and do so quickly.
What about individuals? What can and should the average citizen, your constituents, do to insulate themselves from these Russian social media trolls, especially in the lead up to November?
Well, to begin with, self-awareness or awareness of the situation is the most important thing. We have to get long past what the president has asserted, namely that there was no interference. People need to understand there was interference, and it continues as we speak. We have had verification that the Russians are interfering in the pending Mexican national elections. They're not going away until the price that they pay for interference is too great. And as long as that is the case, the individual citizen must be aware of it. And as a matter of fact, I think the absolute best antidote to all of this is increased engagement, increased involvement. I would love nothing more in the midterm elections 262 days from now to see turnout go through the roof compared to what it has been. That's a way to send a message to the Republicans. This is our country. This is our democracy. You can't have it. You can't interfere.
Congressman, is there more that you think the tech companies could do here? Because obviously so much of what happened was done through channels that are all out in the open, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, and so on. How satisfied are you right now with the degree to which these companies are taking it seriously?
Well, I think they're beginning to, but I'm not satisfied. I think they could take it a lot more seriously. And as I indicated at the hearing that we had with those social media platform companies, what is so important for us to understand is that each of these companies, all of which are relatively new, have been stood up, have grown, have prospered, have become a very important component of how we do commerce in this country and how we interact with one another. All of that success is brought about by the stability of the democracy known as the United States of America, and the rule of law under which we operate. And one of those laws is, if you're a foreign country, stay out of our elections.
Congressman, I just want to switch gears for the last question, because you are on the House Intelligence Committee, and ask you about another piece of news today that is tied to the tragedy in Florida, that school shooting. Governor Rick Scott of Florida has called for the resignation of the FBI director after we learned earlier today, and after he talked about earlier today, that is the FBI director, Chris Wray, that the FBI received a tip on the shooter that they did not follow up on. What's your position on that?
Well, I just heard about this literally within about the last 90 minutes, as I have been in meetings all day. I think it's a little too early for me to both indict and convict the director of the FBI, but certainly, absolutely, follow-up and investigation is called for. If there is a breakdown in this system, we need to fix the system, and we also need to hold people accountable.